Today, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Mary Claire O'Brien, who's a professor of emergency medicine at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, who was the leading medical expert informing the FDA decision to remove pre-mixed alcoholic energy drinks from U.S. markets back in 2010. It's really great to have you on today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So maybe to start with, energy drinks in general, when we talk about what they are, I think most people understand it's a stimulant of sorts. Some of them have caffeine, which we're used to getting when we drink coffee. What exactly, is it always caffeine, or are there other stimulant elements in these energy drinks? And how does the dosage compare to a cup of coffee, for example?
So those are all very good questions. So from a physiologic standpoint, energy is calories that you consume. But all of us would understand that really what energy drinks do is deliver caffeine in one or various forms, either added as a chemical or in guarana or yerba mate or other things where there are additives that are essentially just other forms of caffeine. Brewed black coffee has about 34, the average homebrewed black coffee has about 100 milligrams of caffeine in it. And that's a good strong cup of homebrewed black coffee. And a cola that you would buy over the counter has about 35 or 50 milligrams of caffeine in it. Energy drinks are very variable in the amount of caffeine that they contain because of a quirk of an FDA situation in which they are not regulated as beverage by the Food and Drug Administration. So you can't pick up a cola on a shelf, a 12-ounce cola that has more than 70 milligrams of caffeine in it, which is 200 parts per million. But an energy drink, oddly enough, is considered a dietary supplement by the FDA, and they are not regulated. An energy drink may contain anywhere from 100 to 150 to 200 milligrams of caffeine. Those little bitty energy shots that people pick up all the time have 200 milligrams of caffeine. Wow. So in 2 ounces, cold, one chug, you're drinking the equivalent of 2 very strong cups of hot black coffee that you would otherwise take your time to sip, and you get that jolt of caffeine right away.
When we talk about the feeling of I have coffee and I feel awake and energized, sometimes there's the belief that you are getting something, but what's happening really is that the caffeine is blocking the sleep pressure that builds up. If I recall correctly from Michael Pollan's book, it's the buildup of adenosine that over time makes us feel tired. So the caffeine is sort of like, it's delaying feeling tired, really, right? That's what it does?
Yes. So caffeine, although we call it a stimulant, is not a stimulant. What it does is it makes you feel less sleepy.
Right.
Now, for those of us who are sleepy, who want to be stimulated, the feeling of having caffeine and waking up, we all are pretty familiar with it. Most of us drink some caffeinated beverage in the morning. However, it is in fact not stimulating you. It's blocking the chemical that's naturally released in your body that makes you feel sleepy. So caffeine makes you feel less sleepy. It does not stimulate you. Unless, of course, you talk about the way that it potentially could stimulate, let's say, your heart rate or your blood pressure when large quantities are consumed, or when normal quantities are consumed, or what would generally be regarded as safe in susceptible individuals, people who might be sensitive to the effects of the caffeine.
So before we get on to the energy drink health stuff, how should we be thinking about what you just described? Is it different than how something like Adderall or amphetamines work?
100%, yes. Mm-hmm. Caffeine basically makes you less sleepy. It is not an addictive substance in the way that we would think about perhaps methamphetamine. And I'm not sure that for the average person, the difference between being less sleepy and being mildly stimulated makes a whole lot of practical difference.
Okay.
It does, however, have important implications when we start talking about mixing energy drinks with alcohol. And the idea that if you take an energy drink or consume large amounts of caffeine with alcohol, that it will stimulate you. And the fact that you feel a little bit less sleepy means that the other neuropsychiatric effects of alcohol and motor effects of alcohol are likewise reduced when they are not.
Okay, so before we introduce the alcohol part, what are the risks of just extremely high doses of caffeine? I remember a story of someone who owned a coffee shop, and for their cold brew, they used a concentrate. And one
Hmm.
day somebody forgot that it's supposed to be watered down, and all of a sudden the caffeine dose in a cup is 10x what it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
Whether it's a caffeine in coffee or an energy drink, what are the risks of too much caffeine too quickly?
So the answer to that question uh, has to be preceded by it depends on whom are the effects.
Okay.
So in healthy individuals who are not otherwise susceptible, the FDA says we shouldn't consume more than 400 milligrams of caffeine. So let's say 4 cups of coffee. Less than that is generally regarded as safe, unless you have a pre-existing condition, which you might not know about. But anyway, that's what's generally for a healthy, non-pregnant, non-nursing adult, that's considered safe
Over what period of time?
in one day,
In
in
a
a
day.
24-hour
Okay.
period. Yeah. For pregnant or nursing individuals, that number is 200 milligrams. So no
Yep.
more than 2 cups of coffee. And it's not saying that that is a good idea, but it's saying we think that's generally regarded as safe. In adolescents, it's 100 milligrams. So that's a strong cup of coffee. But most of us aren't going to give our 12-year-olds a strong cup of coffee in the morning before they go to school. But that's the number or the limit that's sort of been set by the FDA. And then for children, there is absolutely no safe level whatsoever, zero. American Academy of Pediatrics, even though they state that 30 to 50% of adolescents drink energy drinks, there is absolutely no level of safety established in children. Adolescents should not drink energy drinks. Children should not drink energy drinks. Hard stop.
And when we talk about the negative health consequences that having more than that 400 milligrams can have, what are they?
So I think most of us who've had a little bit too much caffeine or had it too late at night have experienced jitteriness, insomnia, nervousness, sometimes at higher doses, ringing in the ears. It can cause stomach upset, nausea. It can cause flushing. It's also curiously thought chronic levels of caffeine ingestion are thought to decrease calcium absorption.
Hmm.
So one of the things you worry about is over time, adolescents, women drinking high levels of caffeine or steady levels of caffeine, will that predispose to osteoporosis? So it definitely interferes with calcium metabolism. And then in pregnant individuals, high and or heavy use of caffeine habitually has been associated with increased risk for miscarriage and for having babies that are small for gestational age at birth. Now that's all, most of us have been familiar with some of the side effects that we would get. But remember, in susceptible individuals, there are people who can't even drink a single cup of coffee. And how do you know that? You don't know till you get, supraventricular tachycardia. And now, guess what? You can only have decaf.
Right.
Which is not no calf, but much less calf.
So when we introduce the alcohol component, and this could be an energy drink that is already alcohol plus the caffeine in the package. It can also be the infamous Red Bull and vodka, right? I mean, these are also drinks that one can kind of mix on their own. What happens when you combine the two?
So the pre-mixed alcoholic energy drinks, which is the terminology that was used, pre-mixed alcoholic energy drinks, and I won't mention the brands because I don't want to give them airtime, but they are 100% off the market in the United States.
Right.
And that is because it is very clear that mixing caffeine in alcohol, those pre-packaged things, which was never permitted by the FDA, was never permitted. It's just the industry got away with it until the FDA called them. That it is associated with increased amount of drinking, heavy drinking, binge episodes. So heavier drinking, more frequent heavy drinking, and an increased risk of serious alcohol-related consequences, like driving with an intoxicated driver, being sexually assaulted, assaulting someone else sexually, and being hurt or injured enough to need to seek medical attention. And what we believe is that the caffeine masks some of the cues that you might get that you had too much to drink, that the caffeine masks that for the alcohol. So you're still drunk if you've drunk enough alcohol to get to be drunk, but you perceive because of the caffeine that you're not as drunk as you think you are. And what you are is been well described as a wide awake drunk. And that's a dangerous thing because you think you're okay and you are not.
So when we read about people who go to the ER after combining these types of elements, and from what I've read, 1 in 10 of those ER visits leads to a hospitalization. What is it people are showing up with? What is it that leads to them ending up at the ER?
So what happens is they go to a drinking situation where they intend to party. Sometimes they preload with a caffeinated beverage. Sometimes they consume the caffeine while they're consuming the alcohol. Two things happen. One is that the caffeine starts to wear off before the alcohol does, because alcohol is metabolized at a steady state. It doesn't matter how much you drink. If you have 5 beers or 10 beers, you're going to chip away, or your liver will, at how much alcohol there is. Independent of how much you drunk, you only can metabolize a certain amount every
Ah.
hour. Those of us who drink caffeine are aware that if you have 2 cups of coffee at 8 o'clock, by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're ready for another cup of coffee.
And this is because of the half-life processing
Correct.
of the caffeine versus
Yes,
linear with alcohol.
that is 100% correct. So there's two things that happen. One is that the caffeine starts to wear off before the alcohol wears off.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing, what that permits you to do is to stay awake longer. So if you drink 10 beers, you're going to pass out. But if you've high loaded on a lot of caffeine, the same amount of alcohol might not make you pass out. You keep drinking longer.
Mm.
So when the caffeine wears off, folks come into the emergency department basically comatose, because they've drunk far more alcohol than they would otherwise have been able to tolerate without passing out, because they have had the effect of the caffeine helping them to stay awake longer.
Wow. Yeah, anecdotally, I've had experience with this, not in the situation you're describing, but since I was a kid, I would have a sort of like vasovagal episodes where I would faint. And as an adult, I had a situation where before boarding a flight in Rome, I had an espresso with my girlfriend in the waiting area, because it's Rome, right? I mean, what do people
Right.
do? And then on the plane, they served free wine. I never have
Sure.
alcohol on airplanes, but I said, it's a long flight. We're watching a movie. It was
Right.
one espresso and one glass of wine. I was very dehydrated and I fainted on a
Sure.
plane, and it became a horrible thing. I needed, 30 days of a heart monitor to make sure I was okay. It was just one of
Right.
these episodes, but that seems to be another, and that's also that same combination of how these things operate, right?
It is, and what that would tell you, that you as an individual are susceptible. And
Right.
so even though the FDA would say, oh, you could have up to 4 strong cups of coffee every day, you know better, because you've had the experience of mixing one espresso with one glass of alcohol and your body does not tolerate it.
Right.
How do you know whether or not you're one of the susceptible individuals? You have to have something bad happen
Yeah, I
first.
figured
And
it out.
that's
Right. Yeah. What are
right.
the for people who regularly consume either significant amounts of energy drinks with or without the alcohol combination, but in either case, what do we know about long-term health effects?
So that's a very, very good question. And one of the things that is challenging in the research is that human studies on caffeine, high levels of caffeine over long periods of time, are really limited by two things. The first is tremendous variation in individual sensitivity to caffeine, and then in the amount in which the rate at which caffeine is metabolized. So you metabolize caffeine a little bit differently than I do. And that's because we're all individuals, because I'm a woman, you're a man. You may or may not smoke cigarettes. You may or may not be taking medications that would affect your caffeine metabolism. And so individuals, even if you had 10 individuals sign up for a lab trial, going into it, that confounds the study. And secondly, we worry long-term about the cardiovascular side effects in particular, and again, about bone density. And the ability to do the research that would establish it is ethically constrained for
Yes.
that reason. Particularly so for women, when they're concerned about where there are concerns about reproductive effects of
Right.
long-term use of caffeine.
When we talk about studies that make claims, and this is more general, I think, about coffee than it is about energy drinks per se, but I'm curious your thoughts. Drinking 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day is associated with longer lifespan, right? This is a common thing. And it's sort of like with eggs, coffee is good and then it's bad and then it's good. And it depends how you test it or
Yeah.
who you ask or when. With anything food and drink related, it seems that part of the difficulty is whenever you're adding or taking something away, you're always replacing with something else. And it can be hard to know whether the effect is from the removal of some, or what
Yeah.
is the best science we currently have about those types of claims, about a couple of cups of coffee and longevity?
So what we do know is that healthy, non-pregnant, non-nursing individuals can include an energy drink or a strong cup of coffee or two in their daily diet in moderation. So just like you would do anything else in moderation for healthy, non-pregnant, non-nursing individuals, caffeine in moderation is thought to be generally regarded as safe. And that's what we know.
Now, that's extraordinarily narrow language. It is generally regarded This, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when my girlfriend, when we were in the process of starting a pregnancy, she was told by a doctor that some of the assistive medications that exist, we don't currently believe they increase the risk of reproductive cancers, which again, when I hear that, I say, it sounds like
Forget
they
it.
might. It sounds like they
Right.
might.
Yeah.
And so we really don't know.
We know that it's generally regarded as safe.
Okay.
That's what we know, with the exceptions that, for pregnancy, for nursing, for adolescents, and for individuals who might be susceptible, whoever they are.
Yeah.
That's what
Okay.
we know.
Wow. Which I guess the answer is we maybe would like to know more than we actually do know right now.
It's true. Remember that there are constraints around science that would establish what's safe. Part of it is the individual metabolism, absorption of these substances, and then part of it is the constraints over long-term health effects that are unknown, and that limit our ability to reproduce in the laboratory what people commonly do in real life.
Right. Last thing I wanted to ask you about, do you think that, so obviously with the pre-mixed drinks, they're off the shelf. It's a regulatory decision that was made. When it comes to, I mean, you tell me, coffee of different kinds or energy drinks that are just energy drinks, do you think there needs to be more regulation or government involvement, or is it really just about educating people and making people aware of the amounts of these things that they're consuming?
So you asked my opinion, so I'm going to give you an opinion.
Yes.
And I think it's poppycock that they are regulated as dietary supplements.
Ah,
They're beverages. And that was a decision made in the mid 1990s. The decision that the FDA made about limiting the caffeine in cola beverages was made in 1959. And the energy drinks really came onto the market in the 1990s, particularly late 1980s, early 1990s. And in the mid 1990s, the FDA made a decision that said these are dietary supplements, they're not beverages. And if they were regulated in the same way as are the can of Coca-Cola that you can buy in the grocery store right next to them, then that would make more sense to me. I think it's poppycock.
and if
And
they were regulated in the same way as soda, the differences would be labeling, or also there would be limits that would be placed.
yeah, there would be limits. So we mentioned guarana and yerba mate. Those are both natural sources of caffeine. And so they are listed as additives to energy drinks. They're more caffeine.
Mm,
Now, I did a little research to prepare for speaking with you and looked at a couple of things on the shelf. And most of the beverages that I saw do list the amount of caffeine that's in them.
okay.
However, there is not. I just think you would not give 3 or 4 cups of coffee to your average 13-year-old. You would not let a kid in high school think that an energy drink could serve as a sports drink when they're not. You would, and yet that's what goes on.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we will see if that ever, is there an
Well,
appetite to change that, do you think? It doesn't seem like it.
yes,
Or there is. Oh, okay.
no, there is, and letters have been written by a couple of senators, and this goes back a while though.
Yeah.
Is there a current appetite? No. Was there a lot of appetite in the wake of the research about the health effects of energy drinks and alcohol? Yes.
Mm.
Did that stir the pot about the health effects of energy drinks at all without alcohol? Yes. Has that energy and enthusiasm for making change continued? It has not over the last decade, and I'm not sure why that is.
Understood.
Um,
Understood. We've been speaking with Dr. Mary Claire O'Brien, professor of emergency medicine at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate your insights.
you're welcome. I am impressed with your level of knowledge about the science of the subject, and you can call me anytime. That was
Thank
good.
you.